So today I'm going to be going over my favorite leader of EB01, Blue Yellow Ace, and I'm just going to go over the different cards I play and how they influence the deck's game plan and how it plays into different matchups. And then after I go through all the cards, I'm just going to briefly go over all of the meta matchups of the EB01 format. So to start off, I'm just going to show the card that I consider to be the most important card in Blue Yellow Ace and the card that makes it competitively viable, and that's Pudding. So Pudding inherently gets value in this deck because in the early turns, you're going to be swinging 7k at least with leader every time because you're going to be wanting to use lead effect on each turn. And so between that lead effect plus potentially a baby effect that's going to buff your leader to a 9 and potentially playing Ace out of life, which is a rush character and allows you another 7 swing, you're just going to be forcing your opponent to take lives on most turns, or they're going to have to ditch absurd amounts of counter that are going to significantly hinder their future plays. So what you're going to do is you're just going to swing these 7s and 9s. Your opponent's going to take their lives, and then at some point they're going to be at 7, 8, 9 cards, and then you just play Pudding and you eliminate all that hand advantage that they developed and any sort of cycling they might have been doing through the game to optimize their hand is completely annihilated. So Pudding is just able to put you into such optimal play positions because if you have a character on board and you have your leader, and then you're able to, on 8 Dawn, let's say, shuffle your opponent's hand back in, and they lose any hand advantage they developed, and then you can swing with your character, you can swing with a rush ace, and you can buff your leader to 9. So that means that if they have 5 cards at this point, they're just going to have to either go super low on lives or go to no cards in hand, and then on the subsequent turn you're in a really good position to win the game. And against the black yellow Luffy, this is just the most important card. This is what's going to demolish their game plan. They're looking to take all of their life and build up a big hand so that they can do all of their different combo plays. As soon as they are at 7 cards, you probably just want to putting their hand away, and they're going to be cycling with Sabos all game to be building their hand, and then you just play Pudding, you ruin that. And unlike most decks that are going to want to starve against black yellow Luffy, Pudding is so strong that it allows you to just swing into their life, and it doesn't matter because them getting that hand advantage isn't going to really influence the game because you're going to just be able to play Pudding. And so then after Pudding, I have the 3 brothers. So first up is Ace. I consider Ace to be the most important one of the brothers for this deck. Simply because I'm playing Ace, I'm always going to be taking my first 2 lives just so that I can activate Ace's effect, because the aggression that this deck is able to have is just insane once you're at 2 life. And once I'm at 2 life, then I'm going to start protecting, generally as long as my leader is a 7k, which is the goal for every turn. And so some crazy plays that you're able to do with Ace is on your 6 Dawn turn, you can attach 2 Dawn to lead, use lead effect. If you get Ace and put him down, then you can play the baby Ace. So then you buff your lead up to a 9k, and you play big Ace, and then you attach 2 Dawn, and you can split 9-9 on your 3rd turn, which is just insane pressure. Your opponent's going to have to take it, and then on your 8 Dawn turn, you're just able to play Pudding and eliminate those cards that they got. So Ace, by far the most valuable card. I'm okay even drawing big Ace just because playing it down as a 5 cost is a really strong tempo play, and it's a difficult body to remove for a lot of decks. It's just the bread and butter behind this deck. And next we have Sabo. Sabo, sometimes the effect is going to be valuable because you can use leader ability and just put a face-up card in life and then trash it off Sabo to KO a character. against Sakazuki, sometimes it can be worthwhile to do that to remove their Kuzan, because you're just going to want to be swinging at Sakazuki's life to push them into awkward positions. So swinging at Kuzan is a huge waste, but it's also a really, really threatening body because it just makes removal on your character so easy. So sometimes it'll be worthwhile on your 7 or 8 Dawn turn to attach 2 Dawn to lead, add a life, and then just trash it with Sabo in order to KO Kuzan. And next we have Luffy. And Luffy is really strong because later on in the game, you can potentially make it an 8K, and it makes finishing out your games really effective, because oftentimes with Ace, what's going to happen is you're going to go down to 0 life, but then you're going to know that with how much counter you have in hand, plus little brother, you're probably going to be able to survive in your subsequent turn, and that's when you'll close out the game. And if you have Luffy on the field, then you can buff him to an 8K, and you're able to swing with your character still without giving your opponent an easy body to swing over as opposed to your 7K leader. But generally, Luffy is not as useful in this deck as he is in Black Yellow Luffy, because you're not really going to want to be taking your lives, but you can get value off of it when you use lead effect and then put a target into life that you can't play with a 2-cost brother, and then you can still get value from it by just trashing it and drawing a card from Luffy. And then, of course, I have all 12 of the little brothers. As I've posted about, my strategy with this deck is to count the cards that I'm putting to the bottom of my deck so that I know the order and I know what the strongest plays are going to be once I get through my deck. So to do that counting, the cards that I'm going to be counting, at least as of right now, maybe as I improve with it I can do more cards, are going to be the 3 big brothers, and then the 4 baby ace, because I just think that the ace combo is the most important, so it's what I want to keep the most track of. And basically my strategy for counting the cards that I put to the bottom of my deck is at the start of the game I have a count of 9 in my head. After my draw I go to 10, and then I'm usually going to want to use a leader ability just so that I can get my deck knowledge and already start stacking the bottom of my deck. And then so after leader ability I have a count of 15. Let's say off leader ability I bottom a big ace and a Sabo. In my head I'm going to be thinking 15 AS. And then on my next turn I would draw, go to 16, leader ability goes to 21. Let's say I get an ace and I bottom a Luffy, then I'm going to be thinking 21 ASL in my head. And I keep track of that. Once I hit 50, I know that my next card is going to be whatever brother I bottomed. And then also in my head, I just keep a picture of those letters. So then when I see the baby ace, then I just add a little a to that. So it'd be like big A, little a, SL would be what I was thinking in my head. Alright, so now moving on to the 2Ks, I have 4 Yamato and 4 Hiyori. So basically for this Yamato spot, you're just going to want 5-cost 2K so that it's something you can put into life off leader effect. The reason that I play Yamato is I've found it to get more value than other 5 costs. Just by having this on play effect, it can sometimes get you out of niche situations. Once you're at 7 Dawn, potentially you put something into life, and then you can just rearrange your life with Yamato, put something back, and then if you have a brother in life, set it up. And sometimes your opponent can establish a wide board of little characters, and just having this rush character can help deal with it. You can play it, use its effect to rearrange your life, and then swing 4 at something. But 95%, if not, probably 99% of games, I will not be playing Yamato. Hiyori, on the other hand, is a very playable 2K. The most important thing with this deck is just to try and be a 7K leader every turn. And in the circumstance that you don't see a brother, but you have a brother in hand, you can just play the Hiyori and swap out a life. Generally, I'm not going to want to swap out a face down life. I'm going to want to use leader effect to add a card face up, and then Hiyori it back into my hand, put a face down ace probably, and then play a baby ace into it. So that play starts being really effective once you hit once you hit 6 dawn, 6 or 7. And next, here's something that I'm trying out right now is 4 Garp and then 1 Three Brothers bond event. So as I developed my strategy of putting cards to the bottom and counting them, I was like, okay, so now I want to just be able to dig through my deck as effectively as possible. So I went up to 4 Three Brothers events. The issue with that is that the Three Brothers on its own is a brick, and the highest that it can search for is a 1K. And there's some turns where you're not going to want to play this card out, but you always want to have a hand full of counter. So just by keeping 1, it's basically just a 5th Garp to dig a little bit more. Because if I had the option to play a 5th Garp, I would play it. If I had the option to play 8 Garp, I probably wouldn't. This just allows me to dig a little bit deeper, and it's not going to get too stuck in my hand at any point, resulting in just a significant lack of counter. But it does push you forwards towards your game plan, but the reason I don't like it is that it kind of forces you to play it due to it not having any counter. And next, for now, I'm playing 3 Viola. I'm not sure if I want to stick to 3. 3 or 4 is the decision. Maybe I just switch out the Brothers event for the Viola again. But Viola just gets so much value. It is the card that allows you to whiff off leader ability and not instantly lose the game. Because despite whiffing off leader ability, and by whiffing I mean just not getting a big brother that you can then play with a 2-cost brother, then you still have an opportunity to either flip over the brother you didn't have the 2-cost for, or one of these 6 cards. In order to just gain a life. And sometimes a strategy that was really hurtful for this deck in just OP06 to ST13 format was that Katakuri, the 8-cost Katakuri, could put a brother to the bottom of your life, and it would be difficult to deal with unless you had Hiyori, because the card would just get discarded at the end of your turn. With Viola, if somebody does that, you can have that at the bottom, then use lead effect to add another life, and just add 2 life for the turn. Viola is also really good into the Katakuri matchup, because if you're able to play Viola early and look at all of your opponent's life, then you're going to be able to play around their triggers super effectively. And Katakuri is one of the more difficult matchups for this deck. I'll go over those matchups in a second. So then the final cards are just Shirahoshi and Sanji's Pilaf. As I talked about before, Shirahoshi is another target for Viola. And I like these because they just push you towards your game plan. There's not really any other cards that I would want to tech. You could tech Amaru, potentially. Some people are playing that. It has the great trigger, and then it can allow you to get around Borsellino. But I would rather all my cards just focus on my game plan to make my leader a 7K every turn and to draw me into puddings. So now for going over matchups. The first matchup that I would want to talk about is probably the best deck of the EB01 format, which is Sakazuki. And I think that is a pretty 50-50 matchup. Maybe it's slightly favored for Ace, but Sakazuki just has so many options, and their bottom deck effects can be pretty oppressive. But generally, just being a 7k leader from the very beginning, as well as having a very strong rush character, allows you to put a bunch of pressure on Sakazuki's life and force them into really awkward positions, because either they're going to take the lives, or they don't have that much counter a lot of the time if you're playing really aggressively and not giving them the chance to play Rebecca to get back 2Ks, or Sabo to cycle their hand, or Kuzan to draw cards. And then in the circumstance that they choose not to counter, because it would put them into such awkward positions, then you're able to just play pudding and annihilate the value of their cycling that allowed them to set up their hand, and the value of any cards that they drew. The difficult part of the matchup is when they're able to establish Kuzans and then just use bottom deck events every turn and play a blocker. So that's why, as I talked about earlier, you might want to consider, depending on what the tempo of the game has been, playing Sabo to KO Kuzan. But other than that, the goal in that matchup is just to play very aggressively. You really want to be buffing your leader every turn, because then their wide board of Hinas and Kuzans and Borsalinos is just completely useless. And then you're just able to put them into bad scenarios. I think that the Great Eruption build is a little bit more difficult, just because then they can swing with leader, reduce Big Ace by 1, Great Eruption, and then bottom it for pretty efficient value. And then Ace and Pudding, as in with most matchups, are just going to be your best friend. You want to be really aggressive with these aces. If your opponent chooses not to counter and they build up a big hand, then you Pudding. And so then going into the next matchup, a big deck coming out of EB01 is going to be Red Purple Law, because it gains quite a few good options with Bonclay and Kid and Killer. And that deck is an incredibly favorable matchup. They just do not have an efficient way to be swinging 7Ks every turn. Kid and Killer will take one card out of your hand. But they're just using their Dawn to play their characters. Their goal is to go wide with a bunch of 5Ks, maybe 7Ks with Kid Killer. So that's just the opposite of your game plan. I've had games where I just whiff very consistently in my first turns. I go down on low life, but just by being able to then in later turns play a 2-cost every turn means that they're just not able to get much value out of their leader. Something to consider is that in order to remove Ace, they're going to need 2 reductions, because just 1 Gordon or Raise Max is not going to be enough to bring Ace down to the 3K stat line. They need to bottom deck, so that's another really harsh thing for them. And then also you have Luffy, which you should consider when to use Luffy's effect in order to make it an 8K and thus make it more difficult for Law to bottom. And then, of course, you're swinging aggressively at their life. They don't really have the opportunity to counter that much. They'll probably build up a hand of 7, and then when you're at 8 Dawn, you can just play Pudding and eliminate those 2 cards. And the next matchup that I'll go over is the Katakuri matchup. This is probably the most difficult matchup that I've experienced of the set. Luckily, Katakuri is pretty heavily gate-kept by Black Yellow Luffy in my experience. But basically, Katakuri is rough because they're just able to pretty efficiently swing 7K every turn, put pressure on your life, and then they're able to just drop Big Mom, and Big Mom gets way too much value against this deck by trashing your last life and then allowing them to swing very large, because the only blocker you have is Viola, and most of the time they're just going to Amaru a Viola. So basically the way that you're going to win that matchup is just play super aggressively, hope that they don't have triggers, and you can play around those triggers with Viola, but you kind of want to push the triggers to the bottom of their life because you want them to be adding their life cards to their hand to then increase Pudding's value. Alright, so the next matchup to go over is Black Yellow Luffy. The Black Yellow Luffy matchup is entirely based on how strong your pudding turn is. So basically, all you're doing in that game is just trying to get as much value out of pudding as possible. You're gonna swing at all their lives and play aggressively, which is different than other decks against it, but you have pudding to make that viable. So you're just gonna play pudding and get rid of any of combos that they might have established, because they're likely just going to take all their lives and build up a pretty large hand, and just judge how and when you're going to play your pudding. So basically, you're going to pay attention to whether they're starting to counter, whether they're still just aggressively taking their life, what play they're playing into. Of course, Black Yellow Luffy gets the strongest once they get to their Moria turn and are able to use leader ability plus Moria. So you want to consider trying to play pudding prior to that turn happening, before they're able to establish Moria, which is going to start actually putting pressure towards your life. I'll go over is the Moria matchup. I don't need to go over that as much because it was shown in my last video, but basically Moria just has a hard time with the 7k leader. They're very much stuck on their curve, and in playing their curve they don't have extra Dawn to swing with their characters or leader. And so basically you just play a normal game, you rush them down and get value out of pudding. And then the last matchup that I'll go over is Nami. Nami is a very favorable matchup. You're just able to play super aggressively and put them in awkward positions. And then especially with pudding, in a circumstance where they build up a hand of 7, every time that they get to 7+ cards, I will just play pudding against them. And you're going to want to use your cards that take your own lives, just so that you can get down to 2, so that you can get as much value out of your ace cards as possible. Alright, so that's the end of my guide to this deck. Thanks for watching. Let me know if there's anything you liked or anything that you think I should do differently for next time. Thanks a lot.